Hi everyone, it's Justine, and I've had a ton of questions after Creativation on the new Distress Oxide inks, so I wanted to do a quick overview and comparison of the inks themselves so you can see them side by side and how they work, how they're the same, and how they are different. So as you can see, you have our regular size, so the Oxide inks are the same size as the standard size Distress inks. I made this at Creativation, and this background here is made with the Oxide inks, and I'm going to show you a little bit on how I created something similar to that. So you can see that the Oxide inks are a silvery gray color in comparison to the black ones, so they're easy to differentiate, which is good. Tim has said he has no interest in develop these into minis because the Distress Oxide inks are a mixture of pigment and dye inks, and in order to get a good amount of both types of inks, you need a bigger pad. The Distress inks, on the other hand, are made with dye inks only. So oxides are a fusion of pigment and distress, and it gives off sort of a creamier look than the Distress inks when you lay them down on your craft mat. So I'm going to be doing two tags today, one with the Distress ink and one with the Distress Oxide, so that you can see them side by side and what they look like. I'm going to attempt to do something very similar using the four same colors. I'm using Fired Brick, Worn Lipstick, Vintage Photo, and Fossilized Amber. These are the four inks I was able to take home after the Tim Holtz workshop I attended, and I was also able to work with at the workshop 4 additional colors. If you're interested in these inks and more about them, I would suggest that you subscribe to my channel right now, because I am going to be doing a giveaway in the future for a full set of the 12 ink pads, and I'm going to be doing a collaboration with a friend of mine. We're going to show you all kinds of techniques from clean and simple to mixed media that you can use in your crafting with these new inks. So in my opinion, you can see where I just put down the Worn Lipstick in the pink, and you can see the biggest difference there in the colors when you put them down on the craft mat. The pink is more of a creamier look, and you can see that on its counterpart of the Distress ink, it doesn't change color when on the craft mat. So right now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to spritz the inks so that they're a little bit more watery. Now Tim Holtz's suggestion was that you spritz until you get small droplets, not puddles of water. So I'm going to do that to both inks and add the same amount. I'm using my mini mister for this, and in the workshop we used the larger one. However, I don't have that spray bottle at home, so I'll link to it below. However, I didn't use it in the video. Alright, so now that these are all ready, I'm going to take my ink and I'm going to be doing 2 different techniques. So for my first tag, I'm going to swipe it through the inks to see how that works and kind of muddy them all up. And then for the second technique, I'm going to try just placing it into the ink. So we're going to see what kind of look that gets. So that's using the Distress ink. And then this one here is using the Distress Oxide ink. And I'm just going to go ahead and kind of push that down into there just so I get a little bit more color on it. And you can see the very first layer here as I dry it. So Tim did say that the ink does not need to be completely dry with the Distress Oxides between layers, but it should be fairly dry at that point. Now I'm going to start with my second layer. Now you'll see with the Distress ink, because it's a dye ink, they just keep kind of blending into the surface. So they keep blending into each other, and there's not a very clear, distinct layer by layer look. Now that's where you see the difference between the Oxide ink. You can see the layer, the pigment, allows you to have sort of a permanent layer and then a layer that can react with ink. So I'm just going to spray it with a little more water just to see what happens. I'm going to flick some water on there with my fingers and see how that reacts with it. And you're starting to see the main difference now. The Distress ink is more of a blended look, and the Distress Oxide ink has more of those really fun layers. I feel like with the Distress Oxide ink, it would be a lot easier to use colors that would normally muddy than the Distress inks themselves, because they sit on top of each other, not so much blending into each other completely. Alright, so now I'm going to go in with a couple of extra colors and just add a little bit to layer by layer. So as someone said to me in the Distress class, it's not, if you don't like it, it's just not finished yet. So I'm going to go ahead, again, spritz some water onto those inks. I'm going to add some more color, and then I'm going to get going. Alright, so I'm going to grab my card my tags here, and I'm going to put them, just add some more colors, just adding another layer yet again to that, and I'm just kind of tapping it in there just to get some really vibrancy of the colors. And then I'm going to go ahead and speed up the drying process. Just to make this video go faster, I am speeding up the drying process in each one. So you're going to see the end result though. I'll show them very clearly next to each other. That the pigment or the Distress Oxide ink allows it to get not such a vibrant look, but a very subtle look and almost a white tinge to it. So that's the change in opacity that I'm talking about with the Distress versus the Oxide. And you have a very clear distinction of layer upon layer. For this next technique, I'm going to be doing a similar thing. So I've laid down all 4 colors on my craft mat with the Oxides and the Distress inks. Both are above, so you're able to see exactly which one I'm doing at a time. And this time I'm going to blot the tag into it instead of swiping it through the color. So I'm just adding some water to both sides of the inks so that see how they react. Again, droplets and not puddles of color. And when you put the ink onto your mat, you want to make sure you're pushing down fairly hard to squeeze out a lot of color. So I think I noticed that I didn't put as much water as I did the first time on this one, but it doesn't matter because I put the same amount in both, so the effect is going to be the same. Now I'm just going to go ahead and start to color it. At this point on the first layer, I'm going to start heating it, sorry. At the first layer, I'm not seeing a massive difference between the Oxide and the ink. The magic really does occur when you are adding layer upon layer. And because the pigment in this Oxide ink makes the ink stay wet longer, you can emboss probably easier, and you can still emboss and blend with both of these colors, and it's not a problem. So now I'm just going through adding layer upon layer, color upon color, and you're going to be able to see the difference here in some of the inks. Now, doing this technique, there is a less of an obvious difference between the 2 inks, I find. However, when I was finished with both tags, it is very clear that the Distress inks are more vibrant and the Oxide gives off that very pale look. So once again, you're seeing that very pale look of the reds and everything like that, but I'm going to go in and add a couple of more colors once again. Some fossilized amber. I wanted to brighten up this tag a little bit because I had a lot of brown, and I wanted to tone down the Distress one because I had a lot of yellow. So I added some brown on one side and some yellow on the other, and then we're going to see. So again, go ahead and add colors in. If you don't like something that you did, while it's still wet, you can pick it up with a dry cloth or a dry baby wipe, and it'll take off the majority of that color. So now you're going to be able to see the difference with this technique. Instead of sliding it through the ink, but rather blotting it into the ink, you're going to be able to see that difference as well. So once again, the Distress is extremely vibrant. The Oxide is more of a subtle look, but more of a layer upon layer approach. The last thing I wanted to show you here was applying the stamping technique to the inks as well. So Ranger was pretty good to us during the workshop and actually gave us these really cute ostrich stamps, and so I wanted to try it. So I just inked that with Distress inks, and then I'm going to go ahead and use some Distress Oxide. Both of these are in Vintage Photo, both the same color. Now, when I was doing this technique, I did add a little bit too much water to it, but I wanted to show you that the main difference is that when I add water to this, because of the pigment, it still maintains somewhat of its shape, where when you add it to the Distress ink, you can see the shape just completely fades away. And I just grabbed a baby wipe actually just to blot it a little bit because I really did put way too much water on it, but you'll see that the actual Oxide ink maintains its shape while the Distress kind of erases. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe. You can check out more details on my blog and pin some instructions. And then I have more videos featuring Distress inks here on the bottom if you want to check those out. Thanks so much for watching, everyone.